Yeah, hello again. Before moving on with our exploration of Midnight Cowboy and giving a reading, whispered, I just want to touch upon something briefly. Someone had asked me about the image here, and yeah, that's true. It is. It's an actual painting. It's an oil painting, as you can see. I can move it around here, pick it up, and it's a small canvas. It's oil on canvas, and I painted it. Oh God, wow, 18 years ago. It's so hard to believe. It seems like yesterday. In 2005. Actually, during that period, there were quite a few of oils that I had completed. Some of which I still have, and some of which were sold. And the ones that were sold, they were, in fact, people I had known. I knew nothing about marketing. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, they're actual paintings. This one of clouds is the only one of clouds that I have. It's not really a topic or a subject matter I was really interested in, but I was experimenting with a lot of things. And I'm just going to tell people straight off the bat that this painting is, although it may seem to people to render a realistic capture, the truth is, most landscape painters and whatnot, of which I'm not one of, will tell you that something like clouds are rather easy. One of the most, the skies are one of the most easiest things to render. The thing that would be difficult is if you say okay, I'm already spending too much time on this, but the the hard thing it would be to like take a picture of some clouds and then render them what you see there. This is not a painting of something I looked at. You understand? It's not a life drawing. It's not something I try to replicate. It's just random brush strokes. And basically all you need here for this particular painting, as I think back, is probably two, at the most, three values of the blue, which is a baby blue, right? And I made those colors. What I'd usually start with were, I'd have 5 paint tubes. Except for some very few exceptions, I'd have 5 paint tubes of red, blue, and yellow, your primary colors, and black and whites, and create my own colors. And this blue I came up with, I made a couple of hues and a specific white, whatever that white would turn out to be. Like, it's just, whatever, just as is. And yeah, the feathering, the blotching with the tip of a thick paintbrush would create the cloudy, smoky quality you see on top, and broad strokes horizontally would create the white streaks. And it's, there's no, it's almost skillless, actually, that particular painting. But yeah, I did create it. Held on to it as well as some others. I never really put them out there, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe in the future we'll put some more artwork up there in the background. I have attached some artwork, some sketch drawings, some comic booky illustrative sort of things to some of my videos. But yeah, just again, it is an actual painting. You're right about that. And yeah, yeah, you think it's so great, you want to buy it? Anyway, just kidding. Well, not really. Hey, that would be something. But anyway, I thought I'd get on with our reading, which the first video brought us to Bailey's introduction to the book, and we arrive here at part one of Herlihy's The Midnight Cowboy. Whispered for your listening indulgence. There's no beatitude for the lonesome. The book don't say they are blessed. Mr. O'Daniel. Part 1. 1. In his new boots, Joe Buck was 6'1", and life was different. As he walked out of that store in Houston, something happened in the whole bottom half of him. A kind of power he never even knew was there had been released in his pelvis, and he was able to feel the world through it. Brand new muscles came into play in his buttocks and in his legs, and he was aware of a totally new attitude toward the sidewalk. The world was down there, and he was way up here on top of it, and the space between him and it was now commanded by a beautiful, strange animal. Himself, Joe Buck. He was strong. He was exultant. He was ready. I'm ready, he said to himself, and he wondered what he meant by that. Joe knew he was no great shakes as a thinker, and he knew that what thinking he did was best done looking in a mirror, and so his eyes cast about for something that would show him a reflection of himself. Just ahead was a store window. To click, to click, to click, to click, his book said to the concrete, meaning power, 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 as he approached the window head on. And there was this new and yet familiar person coming at him, broad-shouldered, swaggering, cool and handsome. Lord, I'm glad I'm you, he said to his image, but not out loud. And he then, hey, what's all this ready crop? What you ready for? And then he remembered. When he arrived at the hotel, a hotel that not only had no name, but had lost its O as well. He felt the absurdity of anyone so rich and hard and juicy as himself ever staying in such a nameless, no-account place. He ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, went to the second floor rear, and hurried into the closet, emerging seconds later with a large package. He removed the brown paper and placed on the bed a black and white horsehide suitcase. He folded his arms, stood back and looked at it, shaking his head in awe. The beauty of it never failed to move him. The black was so black, and the white so white, and the whole thing so lifelike and soft. It was like owning a miracle. washing away the possibility of future dirt. Joe set about removing from the hiding place other treasures purchased in recent months. 6 brand new western cut shirts, new slacks, black gabardines, and black cottons, new underwear, socks, a half-dozen pair, still in their cellophanes, 2 silk handkerchiefs, to be worn at his neck, a silver ring from Juarez, an 8-transistor portable radio that brought in Mexico City, without a murmur of static, a new electric razor, 4 packs of Camels, and several of juicy fruit chewing gum, toilet articles, a stack of old letters, etc. Then he took a shower and returned to the room to groom himself for the trip. He shaved with his new electric razor, cleaning it carefully before placing it in the suitcase, splashed his face and armpits and crotch with Florida water, combed a nickel-sized glob of Brill cream into his brown hair, making it appear almost black, sweetened his mouth with a fresh stick of juicy fruit and spat it out, applied some special leather lotion to his new boots, put on a fresh $7 shirt, black, decorated with white piping, a shirt that fit his lean, broad-shouldered frame almost as close and neat as his own skin, tied a blue handkerchief at his throat, arranged the cuffs of his tight-thighed whipcord trousers in such a way that, with a kind of stylish untidiness, they were half in and half out of those richly gleaming black boots, so you could still see the yellow sunburst at the ankles. And finally, he put on a cream-colored leather sport coat, so soft and supple it seemed to be alive. Now Joe would appraise the finished product. During the grooming process, he seldom looked at his total image. He would allow himself to focus only upon that patch of face being covered by the razor at a given moment, or at the portion of the head through which the comb was traveling, and so on, for he didn't want to wear out his ability to perceive himself as a whole. He was in some ways like a mother preparing her child to meet some important personage whose judgment will decide the child's fate, and so when all was ready and the time had come to assess the total effect, Joe Buck would actually turn his back on the mirror and walk away from it, roll his shoulders to get the kinks out, take a few deep belly breaths and a couple of quick knee bends, and crack his knuckles. Then he would standing in his own boots, motivator of his own muscles and faculties, possessor of all that beauty and hardness and juice of youngness, box seat ticket holder to the brilliant big top of his own future, and it was nearly overwhelming to him. Formerly, and not so long ago, there had confronted him always in mirrors a brooding and frightened and lonesome person who was not at all pleased with himself, but he was gone now, put out of the way entirely, while Joe beheld the new. He could not have borne one more scrap of splendor without buckling under the wonder of it, for even as it was, he felt that if he savored for one more instant the incredible good future of being himself in this time and place and on the move through it, he might easily wreck it all by weeping. And so he gathered up his possessions and left that H-Tel for good. Over the door of the Sunshine Cafeteria was a big yellow sunburst with a clock, 20 to 7, set in it, and on the face of the clock it read, "Time to eat." As Joe approached the place, he saw enacted in his mind the following scene. He goes into the Sunshine. His employer, a pink man in a soiled gray suit, is just inside the door, holding his pocket watch in his right hand and shaking the forefinger of his left at Joe. "You're due here for 4 o'clock. 4 to midnight, understand?" he shouts. Customers stop eating and look up. Joe Buck takes the pink man by the ear and leads him past the astonished diners and into the scullery. A number of cooks and counter girls and dishwashers pause in their work to watch as Joe shoves the pink manager against the dishwashing machine. Joe takes his time lighting a cigarette, lifts a brilliantly booted foot and rests it on the dish grate. Then, exhaling a puff of smoke, he says, "There's something about that dishwashing machine been bothering me. Been bothering me a long time. Yes, it was. What I've been wondering is whether or not that dishwashing machine would fit up your ass. Now bend over." "What?" heading east. He lit a cigarette. The man looked at Joe's suitcase. You ain't coming to work. Nah, I don't guess. I just come to say goodbye. Tell you I'm heading east. East? Yeah, oh hell yeah. Thought I'd say goodbye. Take a look around the place. A door opened, and a fat woman with a splotchy face stood there shouting, "Cops!" at the top of her voice. Then she closed the door and was gone. The colored man put his hand forward. Well, goodbye. They shook hands, and for a moment, Joe felt reluctant to release the other man's grip. Inexplicably, he felt like putting on an apron and starting to work. But that was out of the question. What the hell am I hanging around here for, right? That's right, the man said, looking down at his own hand, still caught in Joe's. What you going to do back there, East? Women, Joe said. Eastern women. They got Eastern women back there, and they going to pay for it, too. Pay for what? The man finally got his hand free. The men back there, said Joe. It's just faggots, mostly, and so the women gotta buy what they want. They glad to pay for it, 'cause it's just about the only way they can get it. The colored man shook his head. That must be some mess back there. He took another empty tray and began filling it with cups. Yeah, it's a mess, and I'm gonna cash in on some of that. Isn't that right? I don't know. I don't know nothing about it. What do you mean? I just told you. Yeah, I know, but I don't know. Well, there's no use hanging around here. I got places to go, right? Joe Buck, all dressed up like a cowboy, suddenly knew he was not a cowboy at all. He stood there, with his mouth slack, his big, slightly bucked teeth showing white, his blue eyes caught on the older man's face. Papa, his eyes said, I am going now to seek my fortune and have come to ask your blessing. But of course the poor colored man was not his father, nor was Joe the son of anyone in particular. And so he walked out of that scullery. The place owed him a day's pay, but he had no stomach for an interview with the pink man who was manager of the Sunshine. The place owed him a day's pay, but he had no stomach for an interview with the pink man who was manager of the Sunshine. Besides, he knew he would never actually tell the man to put the dishwashing machine up his ass. He walked through the cafeteria and out onto the sidewalk, where it was evening and pleasant and clearly springtime. And pretty soon, with the clicking of his own heels to nourish his heart, as he walked toward the bus station, he felt fine, and his thoughts were thousands of miles away, walking down Park Avenue in New York City. Rich ladies, looking out their windows, swooned to see a cowboy there. A butler tapped him on the shoulder, an elevator whirled him up to a penthouse. A golden door opened to admit him to a large apartment carpeted from wall to wall with soft brown fur. Madame was wearing scanties covered by a sheer black necklace just step on the thing and that's all there is to it. The world is music, and yours is the rhythm that owns it. You don't even have to snap your fingers. The beat is you. And when you think about those Eastern women, the big broad on the jukebox sings the finish of the thought for you. Yearning, yearning, yearning. That's what they're doing in the East. Okay, here it is, lady. It's just climbed on the bus. It's on the way. And there's a seat for you. 2 of them, in fact. One for your butt and one for your feet. And you don't need a reservation. The whole world is reserved. And the minute you sling your horsehide suitcase onto the overhead rack, the driver shifts into gear and begins to back out on schedule. Maybe not on schedule from the Greyhound's point of view, but from yours. Because you are the schedule, and that bus moves. Two. Now at this time, in which Joe Buck was coming out of the west on the Greyhound bus to seek his fortune in the east, he was already 27 years old. But he had behind him as little experience of life as a boy of 18, and in some ways even less. He had been raised by various blondes. The first 3 who brought him up to the age of 7 were young and pretty. There was a great deal of coming and going in the household of the 3 blondes, and he was never certain which of them was which. At various intervals, each of them seemed to be his mother, known as Mama this or Mama that. But he later learned that 2 of them were merely friends in whose household his real mother shared. But the blondes all were nice to him, allowed him to do as he pleased, brought gifts, and fondled him a great deal. And at least one of them sang around the house a lot. Wonder when my baby's coming home. The tumbleweed song. Accentuate the positive. The lady in red. He wears a pair of silvery wings. And others. Thinking back on the matter, Joe Buck always supposed that this singer of the household was his actual mother. There was in those days a war taking place, and some of the blondes were involved in it. They would go out at all hours wearing slacks and babushkas and carrying lunch pails. Sometimes there were bus trips between Houston and Detroit, and Joe remembered living in those cities some of the time. Wherever he was, there would be men in uniform coming into the house, staying a while, and then leaving. Some of these men were known as husbands, but Joe could not remember being told that any of them was his father. Later, he was able to surmise that he had been born out of wedlock. At a certain point, which happened to be on the day of an exceptionally still and white sky, he was delivered to a 4th blonde in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and from then on and forever he was never to see the other 3 again. When he would think of them, he would think also of that special white sky and imagine those yellow-haired women to be hiding is some sort of every loved one that will make you cry to contemplate it. Such for Joe were these poor, sad, bony knees of Sally Buck. Sally ran a beauty shop that kept her away from home 10 and 12 hours a day, and so the boy unhappily spent his after-school hours in the company of various cleaning women. These women were never blonde, and they never wore lavender or pale green or lemon-colored dresses. They never seemed to look at him either, and had they chosen to, it would have been necessary to do so out of very ordinary eyes with lashes that were scarcely visible at all. Sundays were not much better. Sally usually went on dates. She had a weakness for men, especially outdoor ones, and many of her beaux were ranchers who wore western hats. These big, broad-shouldered, ruddy-faced western men went for pretty little Sally in a big way. She was all gossamer and perfumed and fingernail polish, and they were all leather and muscle and manure, and each was titillated by the contrast. Sometimes Joe was taken along these dates, and he liked and admired a number of Sally's men, but only one of them paid him any more than a counterfeit token of attention. This man was named Woodsy Niles. His beard was blue and his eyes were bright, and he showed little Buck how to ride a horse and how to make a slingshot, and he taught him how to chew tobacco and how to smoke cigarettes, and a special way of holding his beater so that he could piss an arc higher than his own head. Woodsy Niles was a happy kind of a man who had his own pleasurable and snappy way of doing everything, even walking. Yes, he walked as if he believed no moment should pass without pleasure, and he took enjoyment even from such simple acts as moving across a room or opening the coral gates. He sang a lot of songs, too, this Woodsy Niles. Sang them in a fine, manly voice, accompanying himself on a guitar, and sometimes when they spent the night at his ranch, Joe would awaken as late as 3 a.m. to the songs that issued from the bedroom where Woodsy and Sally slept. The boy always supposed Woodsy had simply awakened in the night feeling far too strong and handsome and salty to squander himself on mere sleep, and was forced to let off some of the excess in a course of 2 of the last roundup. He did the get-alongs in a way that made Sally giggle, and when he got to the part about the place in the sky where the strays are counted and branded, Joe was apt to get the blues, but in a strangely pleasurable way, and he had to restrain himself from joining the beautiful people in the bedroom. This was one of the first things Joe learned about lying with a woman in the night. You sing songs to her. It seemed a splendid way to do, and what's more, the whole house got the good of it. But inevitably, Sally had some falling out or other with this remarkable man, as sooner or later she did with all the others, and Joe was left to pine for him as for a gone-away father. But surely it was in this time of Woodsy Niles that Joe had begun to see himself as some sort of a cowboy. There was, following this love affair, a flurry of Sundays in which Sally Buck took the boy to church. What she liked best about these mornings was their promenade aspect, the opportunity afforded for daytime dress-up. Spending almost all of her daytimes in the shop, she had, for example, few opportunities and a pack of camels, and each morning he checked to see if anyone had come in the night for a chew or a smoke. No one ever did, and soon he lost completely the belief that there was anyone walking with him or talking with him or telling him he was his own. Jesus joined the people Joe could never see again. He was behind the sky with the three blondes and Woodsy. That summer, the flurry of church-going ended for good when Sally Buck landed a new beau, a telephone lineman. He walked into her shop one afternoon, his wide leather belt riding low on his hips, heavy with tools to make an installation. Sally's pupils dilated his television addiction, an astonishing thing was happening to him. He was becoming day by day and bit by bit and feature by feature as tall and strong and handsome as a TV cowboy. One day, when summer had come and long then had come again, and Joe was swimming in the river, there was a moment in which he discovered himself to be inhibiting the body of a man. except in the most remotest extremities of our North American countries. But it's become the new norm. I know some of you may feel like I do, and we just feel like yelling out at the top of our lungs for it all to just stop. Enough. It's annoying. But that would be egotistical of us, wouldn't it? And it's really hard to know who to be angry at sometimes. Who would we be shouting at? For the most part, it's usually, predominantly, now that COVID has taken a nosedive, it's predominantly street drivers and little spats of domestic confrontations. But it has also become stupidity with gun-toting beanpoles, losers in disguise, zipping around, shooting each other to the tune and background of some funky beat bullshit. Anyway, I don't want to get into it. It's all just part of the decline, I guess you could say, from the interior point of view, that is. Never mind global politics, which we need not get into. This wasn't in any way supposed to be a rant. I think I'm probably just grumpy about anything interfering with the reading. On that note, I would like to say that one thing that was nice is that on this particular day that was picked for this reading, you got a tinkling of the rain hitting the window. It hasn't rained for a while, and it's been doing that today. You might be able to hear it, I don't know. Let me turn the mic towards the window to see if you can pick it up. Here we go. It's very faint and lightly drizzly. You can just barely hear it. I'm not quite sure you can hear it over the hum of the actual room. The hum of a refrigerator unit, for example. The hum of a couple of plug-in air pumps for my various fish bowls and fish tanks. Anyway, going on and on. I hope you're enjoying this rather different story. This writing style and the exploitation of this character so far for me has just been, wow, it's been a bit of an eye-opener. I can understand why Herlihy didn't want to write this book, didn't want to write of this character. It makes me vaguely curious about the man myself. But I don't know what anyone will actually get from this. And, you don't hear too many literary critics or other writers ranting about this man's books. I could be wrong about that, but I certainly haven't heard much about it. But I see in this something else inspiring, something I will keep to myself until I get it into words myself. But I'll just say this. There's a certain amount of courage attached to exposing this, I don't know, James, that is, Herlihy, is, I just lost my train of thought, my words for that. If you're not careful, you'll miss what Herlihy is trying to show you about what makes such a character, how such a character comes to be, deeply psychologically rooted to upbringing, childhood, beginnings, etc. It's both, I don't know, it's like sad and at the same time enlightening. Kind of strange that way. Now, what one does with such an entity, if in fact that person is that type of person or entity, God only knows. However, there is that other aspect to consider, isn't it? Isn't there? Like, how autobiographical is this writing? You know what I mean? How much it does Herlihy relate to this character? Now, he sensed this character, and he bounced around in his brain from what he describes, and he just had to write the book. He insisted upon coming out of the writer's mind. But what kind of relationship is it? Is it like Anthony Burgess's relationship with a character that he saw vividly in his mind before he wrote the book, Enderby, or Inside Enderby? Right? I mean, Burgess described seeing that character actually sitting on the toilet looking back at him, and he got the idea for the book, the Enderby series. But fans and anyone examining that, of course, they were inclined to ask the question, was this autobiographical? Was this autobiographical? Was it Burgess himself? How much of the character is the person? I guess that's one of those questions we'll never truly have an answer to. I'm sorry to have wasted your time with it, because I'm not really sure it matters. But I'm finding the book rather provocative. A little bit, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, too, I gotta admit. But it also shows me what is possible.